Christ in me. What a wonderful request to make of God, that people see Christ in us. There's nothing more beautiful. So I'm continuing on today in the sermon series on the book Prison Paradox, the book I came out with last fall, and we've got 5 sermons left. Today is chapter 11, the chapter entitled Of Freedom and Starfishes. Now, I'm always amazed at God's timing as it pertains to a message, because I was supposed to preach this message a long time ago, probably back in April. But I think God's timing had it that it would be right now, right during this time in which the world is struggling mightily with this thing called love, and hatred seems to be instead the order of the day. Now, I would say this of the things that have transpired over this last week or so. I can condone protesting. There was an unjust death that happened. George Floyd, I was very disturbed to hear about the way in which he died, and it's just a horrific thing, and there should be protesting about that sort of thing, and we should raise awareness to make sure that something like that does not happen again to the best of our abilities. But it's gone too far. Mr. Floyd's family has come out and said to those that are looting and burning and even killing, they've said, stop. Mr. Floyd, he would never want this. He was a gentle man. So I've been praying that God bring peace to this situation as only He can, and I'm sure many of you have been doing that as well. So anger and hatred, it's been spreading like a wildfire from city to city. So here we are on this broken planet. I mean, we're still struggling with the last issue. Corona is not over. And now we have something else. And all that's happening, it's pretty easy for me or probably any of you to sit back and observe and hear about it and feel kind of helpless. Now, as I begin, I'm going to be on some touchy subjects today. Now, it's no secret that I'm white. I'm middle class, I'm middle-aged, I'm a country boy, so there's nothing within me that's a minority at all, and there's only so much that I can understand from my frame of reference. So if as you're listening to me, you're thinking, whoa, he got that wrong, I'd like to talk to him, please do. I'd love to sit down and talk to you. Maybe there's something that I'm not quite understanding. I really couldn't understand, for instance, why the uproar continued after the man responsible for Mr. Floyd's death was arrested. It seems like justice was happening, and yet the disturbances were continuing. And so when I don't understand something that is important for me to understand, what I like to do is try to talk to somebody that can give me some insight from their understanding. And so what I did is I contacted a black friend who grew up in the city. He's a family man like me, so we have that in common, but I asked him, I said, just give it to me straight. What do you think of everything that's going on? And he answered me, he said, I was 8 years old when I first came across this idea that because I had black skin, I might be targeted, that society might see me as some sort of throwaway. And he said, that's been 30 some years ago. And he said the current events have him saying and asking the question all over again, when are we going to matter? That was an honest answer. And at one point in the conversation, this man wept. It showed me, it clued me in on the emotions that are tied into the subject of race. Now, he isn't out there burning or looting, but he really wonders if the color of his skin will always be a negative in his life. That's a fair question, and I pray not. I pray not. I think we're making some strides in that, but then something like this happens and it seems like we've backed up the truck a little bit. And there's a flip side of the coin to this that I would like to talk about. It's not getting talked about a lot, but I like to understand things from a different frames of references as well. And so I contacted a cop, a good cop, a cop that just wants to do his job to protect and serve people of all races. And he said this. He said, it is definitely very inappropriate and toxic to look at a group of people with a certain color of skin and judge them because of that. He said, but he feels right now that him in his uniform and in his police car, he's getting that same thing from some people. They're lumping him right in with the officer that was responsible for George Floyd's death. And that isn't right either. So just to make sure we're understanding each other here, if a cop, him or her or whatever race they might be, if they're driving down the road and they see on the sidewalk people with a certain color of skin, not knowing them, and they're thinking to themselves in their mind that they're lying, thieving, such and such, shame on them. That's not acceptable. And then I would say as well that if someone sees a cop car and automatically thinks that the person inside is a racist that's looking to mistreat and beat people of color, that's not acceptable either. We can't judge the majority on the actions of a few. Our bias took a lifetime to build. What if we spent the rest of our life repairing that? What if we looked to God to change that? Now, I'm not normally at liberty to talk much about the things that happen on a Livingstone outside board meeting. We've got our inside board and we have our outside board, but I don't think they mind at all if I bring up a part of a discussion that we had this past week. Like I said, I am troubled by what's going on in the world, and I'm asking myself, and I asked them, I said, what can Livingstone do about racial tension? And I appreciated very much the answer of one man. He said, the first time I came to a Livingstone church service, I looked and I saw blacks, I saw natives, I saw Asians, I saw whites, I saw Hispanics, and they were all together worshiping God. And he said, that's not normal. That doesn't happen very quick in society. And so that same man, he also reminded me that the answer for racial tension, it's not so much in what I can do, what he can do. It's in what Jesus has already done. Jesus died so that we might be reconciled to God, so that our sin might no longer hold us back, because on the cross he took it on himself and he said, done, it's gone. And if we say that we're reconciled to God and that reconciliation doesn't affect how we treat others, I don't care who they are, well, the Bible calls that person, the person that says, hey, I'm with Jesus, I'm reconciled to God, but those people are blah, blah, blah. The Bible calls a person that would behave like that a liar. Go ahead and read 1 John 4 if you don't believe me on that. And it all goes on to say that the love of God is not in them. So the focus for today's message is this. When we have the love of Christ in us, the love of Christ comes out of us automatically and crosses cultural boundaries. And if it doesn't, we got to take a good look inside. A little story seemed insignificant at the time, but it stuck in my mind. Last summer, we were in Washington, D.C., and we were walking, I believe we were walking from the Capitol building, I think, towards Lincoln Memorial. And there's a park in between the two. And so we were walking on the sidewalk in the park, and we passed by a Muslim woman who had a stroller. And as I passed this woman, I saw in the stroller a young boy, couldn't have been much over a year old. And that young boy just kind of looked at me and looked up and down, and it was almost if he was reading me, wondering, am I a friend or a foe? And I just smiled at him, and when I did that, his face just lit up. This kid had the brightest smile I ever remember seeing in my entire life. And I walked away from there thinking, man, that was really cool. Two people from different backgrounds, from very different belief systems, but we're still both created in God's image, and we just shared that moment of kindness and happiness and joy. And right now, the world could use some more of that. Now, I want to be clear about something, because somebody probably is starting to hear me wrong here. I believe, as John 14:6 says, Jesus' words, that he is the way, the truth, and the life. That no one comes to the Father and no one comes into the kingdom of heaven except through him. But I also believe that loving our neighbor, no matter how different they are from us, is the best advertisement for Jesus as being the way, the truth, and the life. Letting that love flow into us and then back out of us. So chapter 11, as I mentioned, is the chapter that's entitled Freedom and Starfishes. And the name for that chapter comes from a story that I heard a few years back. It's not a true story, at least I don't think it is, but it really makes a point. I just know it as the starfish story. If you haven't heard it, it's pretty simple. It goes like this. There was an old man walking on the beach when he saw ahead of him that the beach was covered in starfish that had been washed ashore. And he saw a young boy, and that young boy was diligently picking up one starfish and throwing it into the ocean. Then he'd pick up another one, he'd throw it into the ocean. And the old man, he got curious. He walked up to the young boy and said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" The boy said, "I'm saving starfish, sir." The old man said, "But there's thousands of starfish. You're not going to make a dent in it. What difference do you think that you can make?" The young boy simply knelt down, picked up a starfish, threw it in the ocean, and he said, "I made a difference for that one." I love that story. And thinking about current events in our world today, it is so overwhelming to think, what can we do as individuals as it pertains to COVID, as it pertains to racial tension? Well, I've got some good news for you if you're feeling like that. None of us is supposed to do it all. Only Jesus could save the world. So just breathe easy on that. Christ completed the work on the cross to save the world. But let's not think that we're off the hook so easy, because he does have a task for each one of us. And that has to do with looking out for our neighbor, to look for our starfish, to look for that person that we can say, "I made a difference for that one." That's one of the ways the gospel is spread. Redemption through Christ, that he came, he lived, he died for the remission of our sins. He rose again so that we know that we have new life in him. That message is spread partially through our compassion, through our words and our compassion. But you maybe have heard the saying that actions speak louder than words, right? That's often the times the way it is. In fact, there's a great starfish story right in the book of Luke out of the Bible. And I'd like to read it for you. I'm going to be in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. Goes like this. Luke 10, verse 25. "And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him," talking about Jesus here, "to the test, saying, 'Teacher, What shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all of your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back.' Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among robbers?" The man said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise."